Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to our webinar today. Thank you so much for attending. My name is Claire DeMarco. I work in our Center for Teaching and Learning here at North Central University, and I will be taking the hosting duties of our webinar on today. But who you're really here to see, to talk to you about Cite the Right Way, is Marisha Kelly, one of our librarians, and Shelley Gordon, one of our academic success coaches. Couple of housekeeping items before we get started. This webinar will be recorded, so if you would like to refer to it later, or you have friends or colleagues who you knew wanted to attend but couldn't, it will be available later. We will be sharing it in our webinar library in the Center for Teaching and Learning. We'll probably have it posted in a couple of other places as well, just to make sure everyone can find it who needs it. We absolutely do encourage questions during the webinar today, but we do have a lot of content to cover. So on that note, we will be taking questions at the end of the presentation, but feel free to throw your questions into the Q&A feature so you don't forget what they are later on in the webinar. I do ask that questions get put in the Q&A. It's easier for us to manage and make sure we address them in there. But the chat is available if you want to communicate with other people on the webinar in there as well. You're welcome to use that. But for questions that we definitely want Marisha and Shelley to address, you go ahead and use the Q&A feature. Okay, well, on that note, I will turn it over to Marisha and Shelley.
All right. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Shelley Gordon. Some of you may know me as Shelley Gordon Baker. So I am both. And today I'm going to talk about how to reference and also how to edit your DOI if the proxy, the NCU proxy string is in your DOI. So let's go ahead and get started. So today we're going to talk about the 4 parts of a reference. I'm going to show you a reference example, and we're going to talk about some of the DOI guidelines as well. So one of the things with references is that you need to include 4 elements, and that's your author, your date, your title, and the source. And those 4 elements will remain the same no matter if you are citing a book or if you are referencing a video. You still need those 4 elements. Now, it's always best, even though you include those 4 elements, you want to look at a sample. And part of the reason is that, for example, a video may need the description video in brackets in the reference. Either way, you still need your author, date, title, and source. So let's go ahead and talk about each of those elements. So your authors. A lot of us will think of an author just as John Smith or Kelly Williams. Well, authors can be multiple people creating a work. It could be book editors, song composers. If you think about a vlogger, they are the author of their content. So think outside of just the author of a book or the author of a website. Vloggers, videos, photographers, they are all the authors of their work as well. So when you're creating your reference citation, you want to be sure that the authors, especially if they're individual names or a group of names for the work, who have created the work, that they are formatted correctly. You want to include the name in this order. The last name should come first, followed by a comma, and then the initials. So if the individual or individuals have more than one first name or middle name, you want to include the initials for that name in that order. Now, if you have more than one name, you want to include an ampersand between the second to last author's name and the last author's name. The next position in the reference citation is the date. So we have our author's name comes first and then the date. You want to include the date in parentheses. So here we have our author, a space, and then the parenthesis, and then the date of the publication. Now, there are certain works that you can include the season or the month. So for example, a magazine that's published regularly may include the season or the month in that date. So this is the way you would format that information if you need to include it. So July, comma, and then the year or the month. All right, you can also include for websites, you want to include specific dates if given. For example, if I went to my local news website and they created an article on an incident that occurred here in my city, that website may be updated later on in the day once they learn more information about the incident. So I will need to include the updated information, the updated date, if that is the day that I retrieved the article. So you want to include that information, the year first, followed by a comma, then the date, and then, the month, and then the day. If your work does not have a date, you will include the abbreviation N period, D period, and that stands for no date. So those are the three ways that you would include dates in the date position in your reference. The next is a title. Now, the titles are broken down into two categories. We have works that stand alone, and then works that are part of a greater whole. So works that stand alone, your reports, books, social media posts, videos, films, websites, web pages. So those are things that stand alone. They are not a part of anything else. Then you have your works that are part of a greater whole. For example, your edited book chapter, that's a part of your book. Your TV episode, that's a part of the TV series. A song is a part of an album. A podcast episode is a part of the podcast series. So these are all works that that are part of the greater whole. I always like to think of it as I have a whole pizza and then I could take a slice. That slice of the pizza is part of that whole pizza itself. Now that matters, whether I have a work that's a part of a greater whole or I have a work that stands alone when I create the title for my reference. So here's an example. For a work that stands alone, after I have my author, my date, then the title of the work, and this is the title of a book, it should, be italicized as well as in sentence case. So a work that stands alone should be italicized and sentence case, but sentence case pretty much means that you are capitalizing the first word of the sentence, any proper nouns, and if the title happens to have a subtitle included, you will capitalize the first word of that subtitle. So those are the general rules for sentence case. So anytime you hear me use sentence case, that's how you should format that piece of information. Now, for a work that is part of a greater whole, for example, this is the title of a journal article, you are only going to use sentence case. So notice that all the words in the title are lowercase except for the first word as well as the subtitle. Now, this is where we really want to look at examples of our sources because what I include in this next section, which is the source section, will be different for the type of work that you have. For example, for a book, the source of the information for this section would be the publisher. If I have a website, I would need the website name as well as the URL for the source. So depending on the type of work that you're citing or you're referencing, you'll need different information in the source section. Oops, sorry about that. All right, so now we have the source section. So let's go over what we've done so far. We have our author, we have our date, we have the title of the work, and now we have the source. So this book was published by HarperCollins. And how you format the source of the information for a work that stands alone is you will use title case. And title case means that you're capitalizing all of the major words. So words like conjunctions, you would not capitalize unless they're 4 or more words. Prepositions, you would not capitalize, if they're 4 or more letters. You would not capitalize unless they're 4 or more letters. Now, works that are part of a greater whole, like your journal article, how you format the title of the journal would be italicized as well as title case. So pardon me, I keep losing my cursor. Here we go. All right, so notice that the J, the C, and the P, and the other P in this particular title, they are all capitalized because we're using title case, and then we're also italicizing the name of the title of this particular journal. You're also going to italicize the volume number, but you do not italicize the issue number. That will be in parentheses. Some journals do not have issue numbers. If you do not find one, then you just leave that section as is. You just place the volume number followed by a comma, and then the page numbers followed by the DOI. So the biggest thing to be mindful of when you're creating your sources is, what is the work that I'm citing? Is this a book? Is it an online book? If it's an online book, then I need the URL. Or is there a DOI? Then I need the DOI instead. Is it a work that stands alone? How am I formatting the title? So those are some of the trickier parts, but knowing that there are 4 key parts that you need. You need your author, your date, your title, and your source of the information. That puts you ahead, because once you go and look at a sample for that source, you're able to mimic that example and create your reference. So let's put this all together. So this is an article from the library, and this is a journal article in particular. So now we can identify, based on the information at the top of the article, the 4 key parts that we need in order to create our reference. So we have our authors' names, and we list our authors' names in the order that they're listed here in the article. So Elizabeth Ramel, that author's name is first. So that author's name is listed in the reference first, followed by Salgin and Tadoran. And then we include the publication year, the year the work was published, 2019. And then we want to include the title. What is the work called? Since it's the title of an article, it should be in sentence case. Now, the next part, the source of the information. Where can I retrieve this information? This was published in Adult Education Quarterly. Here's the volume and the issue number, as well as the page number. And then we include that information after the title, and then the DOI follows, which we'll talk about in just a moment. So before we talk about the DOIs, let's talk about some of the DOI guidelines. And then Marisha, she will talk about what a DOI is and where to locate one for your source. So some of the DOI guidelines, and these are some of the questions that we get often. You want to include a DOI for all works that have a DOI. So regardless if it's a print version or an online version, if it has a DOI, include that in the source information, and that will be in the last section of the reference. If the print doesn't have a DOI, you don't need to include a DOI or URL. So if you have, let's just say you're looking at a hard copy of Time magazine and it does not have a DOI, then you don't have to include one. If an online work has DOI and a URL, I believe this one has both. Notice that this has a URL and a DOI. You want to go with the DOI instead of the URL. So works without DOIs from websites, you want to include the URL. If you've gotten your source from an academic database, let's just say from ProQuest, and it doesn't have a DOI, then your reference ends after the page numbers, okay? So here we have that rule for works without DOIs for academic databases. You don't include the URL or the database name, okay? So sometimes if you are retrieving a work from Academic Writer, for example, it may include the proxy information in the DOI. So you want to remove that information so that it's not included in your DOI number. So for example here, this is the proxy information, and we want to remove that so that our DOI looks like this. So let me show you. Let me go back a couple of slides here. So here's your DOI number. You would have to include the HTTPS DOI.org before your DOI number. So what you're essentially doing is sort of creating the link to that particular article. So that's what you're doing when you create your DOI. So I'll show you how to remove that information in just a moment here. So here's an example we're going to use. So bear with me. I'm going to go change screens here. So here's a reference page. My reference page has the proxy information. If you're using Academic Writer, you will see that the proxy information is there when you're using the reference center. But when you actually download your work, the proxy should not be there. And I can show you that in just a moment. When you download your work, whether it's from RefWorks or from Academic Writer, and in case that proxy information is there, it's very simple to remove. You can do this in two ways. You can either highlight the dash, because we don't need the dash. What we need in place of the dash is a period. So you can either highlight it and then delete it, or just simply highlight it and then select the period key on your keyboard. All right, so now we have DOI.org. So now we need to get rid of this period all the way up to the U. All right, so all I have to do is highlight it. Let me go back here. And then delete that information. And I forgot the period, so I'm just going to select my backspace again and delete. So really, we're just getting rid of that information. And once you do that, you have your functioning DOI, and it should work and take you to that page for the article. All right, so there you go. So I'll show you once again. I have another example here. So I'm going to highlight the dash. And the other thing you could do is once you highlight it, select delete, and then add the period between the DOI and the ORG. Again, we can highlight this information here, the period towards the U. That information we want to remove. And then you can, again, select delete. The other thing you can do is right after the U, place your cursor and then hit backspace to delete that information. So this is what your proxy string, your DOI string should look like once you take out that proxy information. So notice the difference between these two DOIs and this DOI. We want to remove the proxy DOI, the proxy information. Okay, so let me show you really quickly Academic Writer, what Academic Writer looks like in the reference section. And let's see if it'll allow me to log back in here. All right, so when you're in the reference section and you're looking at your references, for those of you who are using Academic Writer, you may notice that the proxy is there. Academic Writer has changed it where when you add this particular source to your paper in the right center and you download it to your computer, it no longer has the proxy information there. It's removed now. So you don't have to go through those steps that I just went through to remove the proxy. However, if for whatever reason it does show up and you download your work, just like I did on my reference page, you can easily remove that information. But I'll show you what it looks like here when we go to the right center. So under the right center, I'll just go to one of my many papers here so you can see my reference page. Now, in the reference section under the actual template or in the template, the proxy string is still there. However, when you preview, you can see that it's no longer there. That'll give you an idea of whether or not the proxy information has to be removed on your end once you download the paper. Notice that it is not there. So this is when I download my paper, when I export it from the template in Academic Writer to my, my computer, I don't have to actually edit the DOIs to remove the proxy information. So that's one of the good things about using Academic Writer. One of the good changes that they've made, rather, is that you no longer have to self-edit that section of your reference. All right, so with that said, I am going to hand things over to Marisha, so I'll stop sharing.
Thanks so much, Shelley. All right, folks, so I'll go ahead and I'll share my screen. And so now that you have hopefully somewhat of an understanding of what comprises a reference, let's talk a little bit about the nitty-gritty of certain types of references. And I've seen a couple of questions in the chat already related to DOIs. So what is a DOI? So this is essentially a unique identifier that is assigned to different types of electronic resources, and it's composed of letters, numbers, and symbols. So just as Shelley mentioned earlier, a DOI can be assigned to a journal article, it can be assigned to a conference proceeding, even books. And think of a DOI similar to an ISBN for a book, a physical book. And what it does is it provides a permanent method to locate or access an online resource. One thing to keep in mind, and part of that checklist of sorts that Shelley shared with us, is that not all resources may have a DOI. And this is usually the case for older print articles prior to 2000, right, when digitization wasn't really around. Also for journals that have not incorporated this type of identification for resources, and similar for publishers who have not registered their content. So ultimately, DOIs are assigned to works, but publishers and authors actually have to go in and pay for this type of licensing of sorts to assign those types of numbers and those types of identification to resources. So the question here is, you've found some really great resources and you just want to cross-check and see if there is a DOI, or how do you know if the source has a DOI? So there's a couple of different options that we have. So if you are searching the NCU library databases and search tools, so things like Roadrunner search, usually the DOIs, if it's something that is part and available for that resource, it will be part of the record. So here we have a record for a resource that I located in Roadrunner, and I'm able to see that the DOI is listed, right? But just as Shelley mentioned, we want to make sure that when we're using this DOI that we exclude the proxy information. And just in case you were wondering, well, what does proxy mean? What does that do? Our proxy is our current authentication method for resources, and it just allows any NCU user to access that content. But with your references, you want to make sure that those DOIs are accessible to everyone who might be reviewing your paper or your assignment. So that's why we want to take that proxy out. So again, pay special attention to the formatting of DOIs in the record. So for some records, you might just see the actual string of numbers, letters, and characters like periods. In some records, you might see a link that looks similar to this one. So make sure you're conscious of that proxy being in there. And this is just another example from one of our subject-specific databases. So Taylor and Francis is one of our larger repositories, if you will, of scholarly journal, peer-reviewed academic content. So here's an example of that proxy. So again, make sure that you're taking out that proxy 1 information and you're sticking to that series of numbers, letters, and symbols. The second option is to check the hard copy or the electronic version of the article itself. So Shelley had some examples already when you're kind of looking for those 4 attributes to build your reference. So we've got things like our title, authors, right, publication information, but you also may find the DOI listed within a resource. So here I've got the DOI for this particular resource, and you can see that it's formatted properly, right? It's a general DOI.org link. And over here, we have the DOI as well. So that series of numbers, letters, and characters pointing to that resource. Now, the last thing that you can do to find a DOI or locate DOI information is by using crossref.org. And this is essentially a free DOI lookup service. So when you do go to crossref.org, you want to make sure that you actually click on the search metadata tab. That way you can search the database for all of these different titles and resources. So easy thing that you can do is paste the title of your research into that search box, hit enter, and then you'll be presented with a list of resources based on your keywords, based on the title, and you'll see that within the body of the search result, that DOI link is listed for you, which you can include in your reference list. Now, I did see some questions in the chat already about citation generators, right? Is it appropriate to take a reference from a library database? And what about RefWorks? So I promise we'll talk about RefWorks in just a few minutes. But let's talk a little bit about the citation generators within library databases. So most databases and most search tools do incorporate a cite feature, which may be helpful. But you want to be aware of these citation generators. So just like this little group of puppies, they may look cute and cuddly, or in the case of our citations, they may look complete and accurate, but they're prone to some messes and some mistakes. So just to kind of give you an example here. So if you are using Roadrunner Search, which again is our central search for the NCU library, and it searches the majority of our library databases, resources, and content on a single search platform, you can actually view a preview, if you will, of the APA citation within the body of the search by using that Cite tool. But you can see here there's some glaring errors, right? We know that for our authors in APA, we have to structure last name, comma, first initial and middle initial if available. So always trust, but also verify. So don't take these citations at face value, because they are machine generated based on the metadata, which are the pieces of information contained in a database record. So these are machines interpreting content, and they don't always interpret content well. And I've got a few more examples here. So here's another example from our ProQuest database using the Cite feature. So if you click on Cite within the body of this database, you are able to preview the APA 7th citation format. But again, if we look at our title for this particular resource, it's listed in all caps. And we know that for our titles, we want to use a sentence case. And if we take a look at our resource link, right, we've got all this proxy information in there, and we don't see a DOI. So you'll want to cross-check to make sure that there is no DOI available for this resource. Last couple of examples here. This is an example from our Wiley online library database, also looking at that Cite feature. So a couple of glaring issues here. We have and spelled out instead of the ampersand. Also, our resource title here is in title case, but that should be sentence case. And if you take a look at our journal here, it's actually abbreviated, which we should also spell that out. And of course, our theme for today, where our DOIs are inclusive of that proxy, we want to make sure that we clean that up and make it a generalized link that all users can access. And if you are using Google Scholar for research, which I do recommend to kind of expand on your access to different research resources that may not be available within the NCU library, you can certainly use Google Scholar, and there are Cite features embedded with in each search result. But you can see here for our publication title, it's listed in sentence case, when in actuality, our journal publication should be in title case. So capitalizing that E, capitalizing that P. So again, use these kind of as the foundation. These Cite features may provide you with a basic foundation for APA and can provide you with those key elements, those ingredients needed for a resource citation, like the author, date, title, publication, page numbers, right? Any links to access the resource, but it's definitely important to cross-check APA style guidelines just to ensure that these are properly formatted. So I do want to touch a little bit on RefWorks. And for those of you that are not familiar with RefWorks, this is our web-based research management tool that is designed to help you gather, organize, store, annotate, and share all different types of resources that are used in your research. So ultimately what RefWorks is a personal database where you can store all of these different research resources. And one of the features and functionality pieces of RefWorks is that you can create an APA formatted reference list. So here are just some basic bullet points, if you will, for things that you can do with RefWorks. So again, you can organize your resources by projects and folders. You can also tag your resources to make them searchable within your database using different keywords. Again, you can create APA formatted reference lists and annotated bibliographies. You are able to import citations directly and indirectly from library databases, as well as research websites like Google Scholar or PubMed. You can access your sources directly within Microsoft Word using the RefWorks Citation Manager tool. So it's an actual plugin that you can install to Microsoft Word, and you can actually insert your in-text citations and build out your reference list using that tool. If you do not have an account for RefWorks, you can certainly sign up for one using our RefWorks link here. So if you are on the library's homepage under How Can I, you have a link to access RefWorks. And when you get to this landing page here for our library guide, you'll want to use that first tab to log into RefWorks, and you will need to create an account. So this is completely separate from all of your other NCU credentials, but you'll want to sign up with your NCU email and then create a password of your choice in order to access the system. If you do need any RefWorks training or some additional support with using this tool, we do offer weekly workshops, so you can register for an upcoming session through the library events page or through the library insider group in the Commons. But our next training session for RefWorks is actually next Thursday, June 17th at 8 a.m. So feel free to register for that if you'd like a complete overview of all of the different menu items and tabs and features that RefWorks has to offer. And if you do experience any difficulty with installing some of the respective plugins or tools, we also offer a RefWorks on-demand support service where you can book a one-on-one so that we can kind of review your dashboard and your personal settings for RefWorks. So because we are talking about citing the right way, I do want to share a couple of different tips for better citations with you. I'm going to toggle back and forth between this slide and our actual RefWorks dashboard here. But one thing that you can do is you can actually set your citation style output to APA 7 sentence casing with that full DOI link within your RefWorks. Now, what you'll find when we're looking at RefWorks is that by default, your dashboard is set to normal view. So you will want to change this to citation view. And you can see that I already have my citation style output set to APA 7, but if you do not have that set, you can click on the settings gear, and this will bring up your citation view settings where you can do a search for APA 7. Now, what you'll find is that there are a lot of variations for APA 7, and that is mostly to combat some of the formatting issues that different research databases present. But the most uniform title, if you will, that you'll want to lean on is this APA 7 sentence casing with the full DOI. And what this sentence casing does, just so you all are aware, is that if you save a resource to RefWorks that has the title of that resource in all capital letters, we know that that is not proper APA format, but this setting allows RefWorks to reformat that title to sentence case. So I'll go ahead and save that. And what you'll find now, because I have my dashboard set to citation view, is that I'm able to preview the formatting for the different resources that I've saved to my reference, to my RefWorks project with these references in APA. So that's our first tip. The next tip that I always recommend, especially if you are exporting from the library's databases, is that you check that the reference type for each reference is selected to the appropriate source. So whether it's a book, magazine, journal article, conference proceeding, sometimes when you save from different databases or search tools, your references might be applying what we call a generic form for citations, and this can be problematic. So just to give you an example here, if we look at this last reference ID, you can kind of see that it's already formatted as a generic reference, but I know that this is a journal article. So you're going to want to make sure that you edit this particular reference and select the appropriate source type. That way it applies the appropriate formatting for that reference. So already you can see kind of a big difference here where that generic reference was missing different pieces of information, but by switching this to journal article, I have some of the key components related to that resource. So for our third tip here, make sure that you review the formatting of author names and be sure to fix any entries that have author names displayed in all capital letters. So we know that having an author name in all caps, such as this one, is not proper APA formatting. So this is where you'll want to take the time to go ahead and again, clean up those records to make sure that when you actually build out your reference list, that it's appropriately formatted. So I'm going to go ahead and redo this particular author, and we'll go ahead and hit save. And now this looks like it should be properly formatted for our name type structure. Our fourth is to check the DOI field in the reference record, and again, only ensure that it includes that alphanumeric identifier and making sure that you remove any of the proxy information. What ends up happening usually if you are using RefWorks and you are saving from a library database, oftentimes what it will do is it will save a link to where that resource lives within the NCU library, right? And you can see that it has that proxy information in there. So first and foremost, I want to double check and make sure that I have a DOI for this reference if it is available. RefWorks is already flagging that I may be missing that information. So what I can do in this case is I can run a quick search in Crossref. So I've pasted my title, I've hit enter, and you can see this first result displays that DOI. So I can go ahead and copy that series of numbers and letters to add to the record. So I'm going to go ahead and edit that DOI field. The other thing that you want to be cautious of is that sometimes these DOIs and URLs can be conflicting within a reference record in RefWorks. So my recommendation is that you clear the URL field if you do have a DOI and just move it to the notes area. And the reason is that you still want to be able to access this resource within the NCU library. So you don't want to lose this information, but we just don't want it to be a part of that reference when we build out our list. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save here. And you can see that we have now an appropriately formatted reference list, and I've got my DOI. So again, with that DOI field in a reference record in RefWorks, just make sure that you're applying that alphanumeric series within the field. All right, last couple of things here. I do recommend that you run the Find Duplicates tool to avoid any duplicate references within your RefWorks. You know, as you continue to do research, your personal database of resources will grow. And that being said, there's always room to maybe add a reference that you've previously added already. But you certainly don't want duplicate content, because that is going to affect how you build out your reference list. And just to kind of give you an idea, if I created a reference list here with my 5 resources, and it may take a minute for, of course, sorry, we weren't able to process your request. Technology is not on my side today, but ultimately it would apply an A and B naming convention because I've got the same reference listed twice. So again, you want to run that cleanup tool of sorts in your database. That way you don't run into any issues when you're inserting your in-text citations and building out your reference list. So to show you what this kind of looks like at the project level, I'm going to tell RefWorks to find anything that's an exact match within my current project. So RefWorks will highlight that reference that is a duplicate. It generally keeps the initial instance of the resource that you've added, or the most complete version of that resource. And then I can just chuck this since it's a duplicate. All right. And then our last bit here is to install the RefWorks Citation Manager for Microsoft Word, which does allow you to insert your in-text citations and create your reference list using resources that you've saved to your RefWorks account. So I have my instance of RefWorks Citation Manager already installed, but if you don't have this plugin available in your Microsoft Word, you'll want to go ahead and click on your Insert tab, and under Get Add-ins, you'll do a quick search for RefWorks. So we'll wait for that to load, and I promise you are not purchasing anything, even though it says may require additional purchase. Your subscription to RefWorks is covered through the NCU library, and you'll go ahead and add that to your Microsoft Word. And ultimately what will happen is this RCM tab becomes available on your Microsoft Word ribbon. And for those of you that would be accessing the tool for the first time within Microsoft Word, you will be prompted to log in with your NCU school email address and the password that you selected for your RefWorks account. But ultimately, as you start writing your paper, you can begin to insert your in-text citations. And by the same token, it adds those citations to my reference list. And of course, you can see some glaring errors in this case, right? So I've got that proxy, which should not belong. So again, you'll want to make changes to those reference records within your RefWorks dashboard online, and then type out your paper and insert those in-text citations. And just to kind of give you an example, if I go ahead and add this particular resource, I've cited this one, it inserts the parenthetical citation, and then it also adds that to my reference list. I have not refreshed my RefWorks Citation Manager since we've made some changes to those records. But again, always double check the information that is being saved to RefWorks. You're working with machines, and machines are not perfect, so you do want to make sure that they truly conform to APA standards and writing guidelines. So that is the end of my slide for the presentation. I'll stop sharing here.
Right, thank you, Marisha and Shelley. Well, I'm glad we have some time left because we have a lot of questions in the Q&A, so thank you, everybody. We will start from the top and go down the list. So our first one is from Wilder. If a cite has the author's information and it has academic in it, do you add the citation?
Wilda, would you mind clarifying when you say it has academic in it, is academic part of the title of the work? So if you don't mind clarifying that question, I'd be happy to answer it for you.
Yeah, Wilder, if you just want to throw some clarification in the chat, we'll make sure to address that question. We'll wait. Okay. All right. This is from Casey. What if a DOI is not readily available for a common source, such as a peer-reviewed journal?
So I think the first step may be to go to crossref.org, look up that journal article and see if you can find a DOI, just in case it's not included in a resource record that you may be pulling from the library database or a general search tool. And I'll let Shelley kind of speak on her checklist of sorts for what to do.
Right. So if you've checked Crossref and there is no DOI and it comes from an academic database such as EBSCOhost or any of those databases found in the library, then the reference would end after the page number. So you would not include anything there. But if you found it somewhere, let's just say Google Scholar or somewhere else on the web, then you include the URL.
All right, wonderful. From Natalie, this content should be addressed in the first class as examples. Is the content in this webinar available in every single first class, regardless of program? How to do references, I think Natalie might be referring to, or is that so I'll have to reach out to the Academic Success Center in the library for?
Yes, and we have a Basics of APA style group session that runs every Tuesday. So we definitely invite you to join that session. And that way you can learn more about APA style, how to cite, how to reference, and all those other guidelines all in between.
Awesome. If you retrieved an article from the NCU library, do you also include that? You think, meaning, do you put that it came from the NCU library?
You would not say that it came from the NCU library. You would only include the DOI number if provided. So you want to include the source of the information. So how APA describes it is that, you know, if you're citing a book, you wouldn't say that you bought it from Amazon. You would say the publisher's name. So that's how you can think about whether or not I should include the NCU library in my reference citation.
Do you remove the hyperlinks from the references?
That is a personal choice. If you are going to use hyperlinks throughout the entire paper. If you're going to remove one, then all of them have to be removed.
If there is no DOI for something retrieved from the NCU library, do you include the proxy.ncu.edu web link?
No. No, you would not include that. If it's, like I mentioned earlier, if it's a journal article, it'll just end there at the after the page number. So you would include anything after the page numbers.
If someone was looking for tips on how to use Academic Writer, where would you direct them to?
Good question. We have an Academic Writer Made Easy group session, and that is hosted on Mondays. So come to the ASC, we can help you. And if you have any quick questions, we also have our ASC chat. So that's something you can also use. And Marisha and I, we host our Write Stuff group session once a month. And that's another way to learn more about some of the library's tools as well as the ASC's tools.
Do we use both the HTTPS and DOI together?
That is correct. Yes.
Can you use Academic Writer when writing your dissertation?
You can. The biggest thing you'll have to keep in mind is that when you download your document from Academic Writer, We always suggest that you use the dissertation template. So there is some copying and pasting involved, but there's nothing wrong with using it to generate your content and then putting that content over into the template.
Are we supposed to use a retrieval date included in the references?
Not for APA 7. So that's no longer required.
Can RefWorks be used with Office 365?
Yep, so it does work with Office 365. The RefWorks Citation Manager tool is also compatible for any Windows or Mac users. So feel free to download it.
Is there a way to get Google Scholar to include the DOI?
There is not. So unfortunately, when you hit that Cite tool, it's going to pull whatever metadata, whatever pieces of information Google Scholar is providing for that reference. So again, you can use those Cite tools, but you always want to double check and make sure that they are accurate, that they are complete, that there is no missing information.
Is there any need to include the date retrieved when accessing something on a website?
There are, no, in general, no. You would only use, and I don't, pardon me, it's just a rule that I haven't committed to memory because I don't, it's just something that doesn't happen often. There are only small circumstances in which you would actually include the retrieve from. I think if you're going to the website up to date, which you can retrieve articles from, then you would include the retrieval date. So for the majority of websites that you're going to use, you would not include a retrieval date.
When you have a multiple page document that doesn't have journal page numbers, but the citing only gives you the starting number, but no ending number, should we add it?
If the journal, that's a good question. I am offhand without seeing the document, I'm going to say no, but Marisha, you may have a little bit more insight of what that looks like on the library end. I'm not sure, so.
Yeah, I would say if you're able to download a PDF of that article, sometimes the records in the library, again, may be missing information or may not be complete. But if you can download a PDF of that resource, you may be able to track where the page starts and where the page ends. So that could give you the more complete and accurate reflection for that reference.
And then you can include it in your citation.
Right.
Wilda clarified, if the author's information has like PhD in it, do you include the PhD?
In your reference, no, you do not. You would just, if it's William Smith, it'll be William, comma, S period, and then the remainder of the authors followed by the other information you'd include in the reference list.
Okay. Someone asked about additional support for connecting RefWorks to Word, so I will refer them back to the workshop that you do, Marisha. Okay. A couple of people asking about that, so hopefully you'll have a packed crowd in your next workshop. Does Academic Writer and RefWorks share similar features?
They do. Marisha, I don't know if you want to start first or I can start.
Yeah, I mean, they ultimately do. One thing to keep in mind with RefWorks is it's more about managing your resources. So you can actually attach documents, so PDFs, PowerPoints, images, all related to a reference record. Treat it as a cloud storage, essentially. So as you're researching in library databases or online, you're kind of saving all of these different types of resources to one central space. And one of the features is that you can create an APA formatted reference list, but it doesn't teach you and provide those guidelines. So I'll let Shelley kind of go over that piece with Academic Writer.
And that's where Academic, yes, and that's where Academic Writer comes in. Academic Writer is a writing tool. It is run by APA, so all of the guidelines there are APA 7. You can create a paper using the Right Center. You can create a database of all of your references. You can find sections of the manuscript, of the APA manuscript in the Learn Center. So it's a great tool if you really want to learn more about APA style. You don't want to, fuss so much about, well, is my paper formatted correctly? Academic Writer can do a lot of that for you. And one of the great things is that RefWorks and Academic Writer play nicely. So you can take your references from RefWorks into Academic Writer and from Academic Writer into RefWorks.
I think we have time for a couple more. When you synthesize sources, how do you cite the same information from multiple sources?
So let's just say I said toddlers prefer fruits over vegetables, and Smith said that, as well as Williams and Berry. They all said the same thing. Well, I would, at the end of that sentence, I would include those names in alphabetical order, the way that they're presented on the reference list. So Berry would come first, 2019. Then I put a colon, then the next author's name, and then the next author's name. So we would put them in alphabetical order, just using last name as well as the publication year.
Can RefWorks be used with RedShelf?
So there are a couple of different ways to add resources to RefWorks. There is not a magic integration for RedShelf text. However, you can either manually add the information through the add feature in RefWorks, or we can look up that title in a database or a place like Google Scholar and export that citation information to the tool. So there isn't necessarily an integration with RedShelf, but there are different ways to get the content saved so that you can produce it as part of your reference list.
This is a great question. We get this a lot in the CTL. If an author cites another author in his or her work, how do we cite that work?
So one, APA always recommends finding the original source. So if Williams is citing something from Smith, then you would try to find Smith's work. If not, you would say something. I'm a visual learner, so I'd like to show things. So Claire, if I have time to show my screen for just one
Absolutely,
moment.
yeah.
All right, so I can show you a good example here. In the Academic Success Center, we have a lot of examples for citations as well as references. And one of the things we have is an example on how to cite a secondary source. So if you see here, bear with me for a moment. So Jones 2015 explained the importance of properly citing indirect sources as cited in Smith 2015. So this information from Jones was cited in Smith. So when you go to the reference page, you're not going to actually include Jones on the reference page, you'll only include Smith. But this lets the reader know that this information was cited in Smith's work. So this is one of the ways that you can incorporate a secondary source into your work. But if you can find, for example, Jones's work, then you can cite Jones directly.
Wonderful. All right, we are right at time, and I did try to consolidate some of the questions in the Q&A, so I apologize if you didn't get your opportunity to have your questions asked. But if you still have outstanding questions, I'm going to direct you to the Academic Success Center or the library. Both have ways for you to submit questions. There may be a librarian or a coach online, and you can chat live, or you can submit your question through their site. So if you get to the Academic Success Center or the library, you can submit your question there, and someone will get back to you. Absolutely want to make sure your questions get addressed. As a reminder, this is being recorded, and I will be uploading it in our webinars area in the Center for Teaching and Learning. If you want to know how to get to the Academic Success Center, the library, or the Center for Teaching and Learning, from your NCU1 homepage, on the navigation bar, you'll see a direct link to the library. If you see the resource centers, that's where the Academic Success Center and the Center for Teaching and Learning are linked from. And just click on there and we'll send you right there. But thank you both. Appreciate your time today. Appreciate everyone's participation. Lots of great questions, and go forth and survive your references. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you again, ladies. I appreciate it. I'll go ahead and wrap everything up. All right, bye. Have a good one.